So about, I guess it's been about 8 years, 9 years ago now, actually more than that, almost 10 years, I and my wife bought a house in South Carolina in the suburbs that backed up to the high school that I went to. It was a really cool house, had a big backyard, had a neighbor who was a really cool dude. He was kind of a country guy in the best sense. Like, he loved to grow stuff. So he would grow okra, he would grow all these fruits and vegetables. And we're in like a little neighborhood. So he had transformed his backyard into this like mini farm. It's pretty awesome. And he and I are talking one day, and he's like, dude, we've got to get chickens. I'm thinking, chickens? Like, I don't do chickens. And he's like, no, really, we've got to get chickens. And I was like, okay, let me think about it. So about 2 weeks later, I come home, and in my backyard, there is a chicken tractor, right? It's this big mobile chicken coop, and inside are 4 chickens. And I'm like, Micah, where did this come from? He's like, well, I have vegetables in my yard. The chickens would eat them. Your yard's empty, so I put a chicken tractor in your backyard. That was the beginning of a beautiful friendship that exists to this day, and it was my introduction to actually taking care of something like farm animals. And so we had a blast with the chickens. We had fresh eggs every day. It was wonderful. If you've not raised chickens, they're quite hilarious to watch. But this weird thing happened. Almost immediately, one of the chickens died. And the funny part was, I didn't care. And then a couple months later, we hear screaming in the middle of the night from the chickens, and I walk outside, and a possum had found its way into the chicken coop and killed another chicken. And once again, I didn't care, right? It's a chicken. I had no emotional connection whatsoever. At almost the exact same time that we got chickens, however, we found out about a dog that was on death row at the local pound. So I and my wife made the mistake of going to visit said dog, and he was spunky, he was spry, he was happy, and we felt like for various reasons we needed to get a dog, and so we ended up coming home with Ernie. And this dog was crazy. He'd escaped from 3 prior homes. He was literally, he is on death row. Either rescue him or we are putting him down. And I and my wife couldn't do anything but bring him home. So we brought him home. He was mad. He was crazy. He destroyed stuff. He would whiz everywhere. We actually got into a fight because he kept biting us. You try to put a collar on him, and he was so terrified of being collared and controlled that he would go after your hand. So he bit me. I can deal with being bit. But one day, he bit my wife. And Ernie and I had a throwdown, right? He begins to chew on my arm. I'm grasping, trying to just get control of him. I end up getting a hold of him as he's trying to bite me. He loses an eyebrow. I lose a ton of skin on my arm. And by the end, I finally have him pinned, chest down, on the ground, my arms around his throat, not because I wanted to harm him, but because with a dog, you have to teach it who is boss. And by the end of that experience, Ernie knew I was the alpha. He listened to me, and suddenly some of those problems began to go away. And over a 3 years period of time, this dog who is mangy, not the most beautiful dog to look at, became part of our family. I and my wife have been trying to have kids for years, got nowhere, so we adopted this dumb dog, and this dog captured our hearts. And he began to change. My wife did school with him every day. He became sweet. He became loving. He became affectionate. He found a way into our hearts. And after a while, we began seeing some health things happen. We got him so we'd go running with him, and he would go running with us, and suddenly we noticed he could only run about a mile before he would stop, and he got slower and slower, and so we finally took him to the vet, and they took x-rays, and they said, your dog has cancer, and there's nothing you can do. You could spend thousands of dollars on chemotherapy for a dog, but it's not going to help. And the crazy part was we considered it. And a couple weeks later, my dog died. We had to go put him down. I feel like I'm going to cry about a ridiculous dog. The reason why I'm telling you this story is because there's a vast difference between Ernie and the chickens. They're both pets in some sense. But Ernie had my heart. And there are times, because I loved him so much, he drove me to anger because he bit my wife. It was self-destructive. We knew that if he kept doing what he was going to do, we'd have to put him back on death row because it was self-destructive. If he bit my daughter, he was gone. So we had to train him. We loved him so much. And yet at the same time, that anger was also reflected in heartbrokenness when he died. I can't imagine even telling you, we fasted and prayed that he would get better, and it worked for a while, and then he passed away, and we were heartbroken because we loved him so much. We haven't been able to get another dog since because it's just too hard. We have two kids. They're okay. But Ernie was our first love. Now, this morning, we're going to look at a story, and we're going to see some crazy things about Jesus. We're going to see some things that if we get them, they're both going to make us extremely uncomfortable, but they're also really deeply going to draw us in. And we're going to see the full, incredible, express, emotional heart of God. So join me in Mark. This is some reading from Mark 3, verse 1. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. So we're talking about Jesus. Jesus has been out across the northern area of Galilee, the northern part of Israel, and he's been preaching and teaching, and he's been healing people, and he's been doing amazing things, right? People who have been sick from birth, who are lame or who are leprous, who cannot be healed, are brought to him, and he miraculously heals them. And it's amazing. And he's been exercising authority, saying, I actually have the authority not only to teach with authority about who God is, but to actually pronounce God's forgiveness over you. I speak for God. When I talk, it is as though God himself is speaking. And naturally, some of the religious leaders of the day are kind of freaking out about this, right? This guy is making incredible claims about himself that no one has ever come close to making before. This is amazing, and either he is dangerous or he is wonderful, and they're trying to sort out which. And in this last section, just before where we are, Jesus has done something even more crazy. He has moved toward people who in the Jewish community were considered outcasts and rejects because they had chosen to reject Israel's God and do things that were clearly immoral, amoral, not moral, wrong things. And Jesus moved toward them and invited them back in and actually ate with them. He had table fellowship with people who were known sinners. It was mind-blowing to the people of that day, especially to the religious leaders, because in their view, these sinners were the exact reason Israel was suffering. It was their fault. And so they shunned sinners and tax collectors. And Jesus does the exact opposite. He welcomes them in. And so this has created tons of tension between Jesus and these folks called the Pharisees, the grassroots leaders of Judaism in Galilee. It's a lot of context, but you need to know that to understand what's going on. So remember, this is what's going on. Jesus is coming out of that, and he enters the synagogue on a Sabbath, right? Synagogue is similar to this. All these people, all the Jews would come together, and there would be teaching, there would be prayer, there would be times of worship and song. Everybody came together. It was the thing you did on Saturday. Notice what happens. There's a guy there with a withered hand. So his hand, through some form or fashion, we don't know, was deformed and not usable. It's probably misshapen. Anyway, he's sitting there. He's in the crowd, and Mark just says, hey, this guy was here. Jesus is there. Can you guess what's going to happen? Verse 2, and they watched Jesus. So you might be asking, who is they? And the answer is, it's the Pharisees. It's these folks that he's been dealing with the last couple chapters who have slowly come to evaluate him and have begun to say, hey, we have an issue with this guy. This guy is not trustworthy. We cannot trust him to stay on our path, the established path of Judaism, and they are creating more and more and more tension. So look what it says. They watched Jesus. So they've got their eye on him. Notice why. To see whether he would heal him, that's the man with the withered hand, on the Sabbath. So in the Jewish law of the day, people, and especially the religious leaders, knew that there were things you did and you didn't do on the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day was supposed to be a day of rest. And it was common knowledge there were things you did not do. You did not go to work on the Sabbath day. It was to be a day of rest. You did the minimum amount necessary, work-wise, to get things done. So you get up. Breakfast supposedly was supposed to be pre-prepared so that you didn't have to do a ton of work there. Everything else was supposed to be brought together so that there would be shalom and peace and quiet and rest so you could be rejuvenated for the rest of the week. And it was common knowledge that on Sabbath day, get this is the extent to which the laws went. the spoken law, the written law from other Jewish rabbis was this: you were not allowed as a doctor to heal someone, to administer healing, to help them, to give them medicine, unless, get this, it was life-threatening. Meaning this: if someone is about to die and the doctor can do something to save them, he can intervene. He can give them medicine. However, if it's not life-threatening, and this is what the actual texts say from that day, if someone's got a broken arm on Sabbath, you wait until Monday to set it. Now, a lot of us thinking, that sounds ridiculous. But what you have to understand is this: Sabbath was the defining principle of what it meant to be a Jew. Keeping Sabbath was what set you apart from the entire rest of the world. Therefore, Sabbath must be protected, because so many Jews are going over. They're becoming like the Greeks, the barbarians. They're walking away from God, and we have to protect it with laws and rules and boundaries so that we know who is in and who is out. And so notice what's being set up here. They are watching Jesus to say, will you keep the traditions? Will you protect Judaism? Will you stick with what is known and what is commonly acknowledged as right? Or will you deviate? So look at what happens. They are watching him closely to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath and get the very telling statement so that they might accuse him. So understand what's happened. His opposition to these guys and their opposition to him is starting to be known, right? They aren't just there as a neutral party. They are looking for a reason to nail him. They are looking for a reason to be able to point at him and say, see, this guy is a problem. Verse 3, and he, that's Jesus, said to the man with the withered hand, come here. Now, can you imagine if, I won't do it this morning because I don't care about embarrassing someone. I should just do it, but I won't. You're sitting here and suddenly the preacher points at you and says, you, come up here right now. All of us would kind of be freaked out. Some of you, I just said that and you're now like sweating, right? Because being on stage is not your thing. That's what happened to this guy. So not only is he there with like a gnarled, withered hand, but now he's just been called out. You, and the words literally, come into the middle. Trips the trap. He springs it, right? Yeah, come on, you come to the center. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. And he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or to kill? So Jesus is saying, hey, you guys are hung up on this law thing, which is not per se a bad thing to get hung up on, but you're so hung up on it. Let's talk about what the goal of the law is. Why did God give us a law? What's his intent for Sabbath? Is it good on the Sabbath? Is it right? Is it just on the Sabbath? And he speaks in pretty big terms, pretty general terms, right? Is it lawful on Sabbath? Notice the contrast. To do good deeds, or to do harm? Notice the stark contrast. Like, there's no middle ground. You can't come out of that and be like, well, kind of in the middle. It's okay to do harm. No, it'd be absurd. You cannot say it is lawful to do harm on the Sabbath. Jesus kind of begins to reframe the whole thing. He says, what's the Sabbath for? Is it lawful? Is it within God's will to do good on the Sabbath? And the obvious answer is, of course. And then he takes it a step further. Is it good or lawful on the Sabbath to save life or to kill? Now, according to their own laws, suddenly he's got them trapped, right? Because they themselves would say, yes, a physician can intervene with healing if it saves life. And he's essentially set them up so that they are trapped, right? Because what's it going to look like if they say, no, it's not lawful to do good? They'll look terrible. Everybody will know it. It would be horrible. They can't agree that it's good to take life. They can't agree that it's good to do harm. They have to agree that doing good on a Sabbath is right and just. Notice what it says next. But they were silent. So silence is one of those funny things, right? Got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. And especially for the 3-year-old, silence is dangerous, right? Any parents of young kids here, right? As long as you can hear them talking and making noise and doing stuff, they can be put around the house. You're thinking things are good. But as soon as silence occurs, danger, right? There was a couple silent moments a couple weeks ago when I and my wife were both doing stuff, and both of our kids suddenly went silent. And we know that's a problem, right? So I'm like, hey, where are you guys? Where are you guys? And suddenly I hear these still small voices up in the bathroom. Oh, nothing. What are you doing? Nothing. And I was like, oh, this is going to be really bad, right? I opened the door, and there's water everywhere. Somebody decided they needed to get a bath and wash some toys, and suddenly our entire bathroom is like a centimeter deep in water. There's water everywhere. Stuff's covered. There's soap. It's a mess. Silence can be extremely dangerous. These guys don't respond to Jesus at all. He's called them out. He's given them an opportunity. He's given them an opportunity to be approachable, to come with him and say, yes, it is good to do good on the Sabbath. And notice, because of where they are at in here, they won't play. They're not going to participate in his game. Look at Jesus' response. This is fascinating. And he looked around at them. It's a really interesting verb in the Greek. The idea is he's standing there with this guy whose arm is maimed, and he's called him to the center, and he begins to call them out. They don't respond at all, and suddenly he just stops, and he looks around. The idea is he takes in the whole room. He's making eye contact with everybody. He's not just calling them out verbally. He is putting them on the spot. And look at what it says. He looked around at them with anger. So this isn't like neutral, nice guy Jesus who's carrying a sheep under his arm and is happy with everybody and just kind of want to stab him because he's obnoxious, right? This Jesus is ticked off. He is looking around at them, wrathful. He is furious. And they know it. What else it says? He's not only angry, he is grieved. This word is used to express when someone is heartbroken. It's what happens when someone you love dies. It's what happens when the person you are in love with breaks up with you, walks away. It's what happens when someone you love intentionally hurts you. You are grieved. So get what's going on here. Jesus is full of emotion. The God of the universe who draws near in human form, not impassive. He is full of emotion. When he sees something that is wrong in the world, it both causes him anger, and at the same time, it breaks his heart. Now, some of us have an incredibly oversimplified and actually unbiblical view of God that says, well, God's either all-loving and he's good with whatever I do and he just wants me to be happy. Or we're on the opposite side of, right, this is more what I grew up with, which is God is always furious. He is angry. That sin you did, he's been watching, right? God's got his hand up there and he's sitting over his computer like in the Far Side thing and he's just ready to hit the smite button, right? And what Jesus tells us is actually both of those things can be true at the same time. And you know this if you've ever loved anyone. You know that the person you love the most has the capacity both to make you the angriest you've ever been, right? No one makes me angrier than my family. And no one breaks my heart more than my family. As I used the illustration about Ernie the dog, like this dog ticked me off to no end because of the stupid. So we take him to a dog park once, right? And he's not a very big dog. He's 35 pounds. But Ernie's not real bright. So there's a 98-pound Doberman Pinscher that's ginormous, that's running around happily at the dog park. It's kind of funny for a Doberman Pinscher. And my dog chases the Doberman growling, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this dog's going to die, right? And I'm terrified. So I'm chasing Ernie. Ernie's chasing the Doberman. I expect the Doberman to turn his tear his head off. And the Doberman, for some odd reason, starts whimpering and runs away. Thank the Lord, right? Saved his life. And I am furious at my dog because by the end of our first and only visit to the dog park, we got kicked out, right? It's pretty embarrassing when your 35-pound, goofy-looking dog gets you kicked out of the dog park. And I'm furious because he lost an opportunity to hang out with other dogs. We lost an opportunity to actually get to know people in our neighborhood with our dog. I'm furious. At the same time, I'm kind of brokenhearted for him. Like, this is a great dog and no one knows it. Everyone thinks he's stupid, and he is, but we love him. Love, real love, as you know, is complicated. It's why we talk about relationships. People sometimes in our past say it's complicated, right? You see the Facebook post. That's actually a legitimate thing to put in relationships now. You say it's complicated. And it means this: I love that person, but I also kind of don't like them. It's why we talk about this thing called love-hate relationships. Because real emotions and real people are complex. Get this: Jesus is complex. He's real. He is as real as you and I. And God has complexity to him. Notice Jesus. Why are we saying this? Look at what Jesus says. He is angry and he is grieved at what? Their hard hearts. Now, that's a very old, ancient Hebrew term, and it describes someone who cannot be moved from their position, whether it's mental or emotional or will directional. It means they are fixed on a course, and no matter what happens, they are going down the road that they are going down, right? And we've been this way with friends before, right? Have you ever had a friend who you could see the trajectory of their life, right? They start making some bad decisions, and someone kind of talks to them, and they don't respond, and you just know in your heart, this is going to end badly. And they keep making those decisions, and maybe it's a family member, maybe whatever. You've been there, right? And while at the same time your heart is broken for the direction that they're going, you're also angry because you know this is going to lead to their destruction. It's going to destroy relationships. You are complicated people. Love is complex. Get what's going on. Jesus does not hate these people who are opposing him. Instead, he loves them so deeply that he cannot be good with the direction they're going. He cannot be good with them using a disabled man for their own nefarious purposes to try to catch him. He cannot be good with that, and so he is angry. But notice also, he's complex. So at the same time that he is angry, his heart breaks for them. What's that word means? That word grief. It is actually a word, it's the only time it's used there. And it literally implies he is pained internally. It's like he is paining himself over them. He is internally racked by the direction that they are going and by their unwillingness to be turned from their course. The real Jesus is full of emotion. He loves so intensely that simple, straightforward emotion and love cannot describe him. It is complex. And so he looks at the man and he says, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out and his hand was restored. Forget it. He says, "I know this is a trap. I know you're trying to catch me. I'm going to spring the trap and then I'm going to walk right into it anyway." And he heals the man. And by doing so, he makes a statement. What is your law supposed to be about? It is supposed to be about doing good, saving, giving life. And get Jesus. And you guys are trying to twist it and turn a different way. And it is such a big deal. I am angry and I am broken, not because I hate you, but because I love you so much. Verse 6, get this. This is crazy. The Pharisees went out, so this is the group that's opposing him, and they immediately held council. So get it. Synagogue's over, everybody's dismissed, everybody goes home, and they don't go off to do Saturday lunch. They go off, and immediately they hold council. The idea is they got together with this other group of people, and they plotted something. They sat down and said, hey, we got to do something about this Jesus guy. And the people they met with, this is what's almost to the point of ridiculousness, are the Herodians, right? And for us, we're like, Herodians, who's that? These are the people that were opposed to the Jewish religion ruling everything. Instead, they said, no, we need to compromise on how stiff we are on the Jewish laws, and instead we need to move towards Herod, who's a terrible guy, and instead we need to compromise, we need to be part of this. And actually, these folks were politically opposed. They were opposite ends. So it's essentially the Republicans and the Democrats get together. The same ridiculousness happened. And they begin meeting together. They're holding council. Notice what happens. These two enemy factions respond to Jesus. How? Immediately on the Sabbath, they hold counsel with the Herodians. And notice Mark repeats it twice in different ways. One, against him. So they are holding counsel, figuring out how to oppose Jesus, not just a little bit like, yeah, we got to discredit him. But notice what it says, how to destroy him. The idea there is murder, right? Get what Mark's saying. Mark's saying in the very same breath that they are holding up Jesus to try to test him to see if he conforms to the Jewish law and the Jewish tradition. In the very same breath, on the very same Sabbath, they'll oppose him for healing a guy, and then they'll walk out and plot to commit murder. It's astounding. What is going on? We are starting to get hints that Jesus' actions and his words are having an impact. And it's not all positive. Suddenly, the very religious leaders of the day who are leading people in religion, who are bringing people together to do church, are essentially coming, meeting the real true God and saying, not only can we not have any part of it, but like we began to hint at last week, we have to oppose this guy to the point of death. That's pretty serious. You understand now why Jesus is angry and grieved, because the opposition is rising. This is a big moment. Now, that's a weird passage. There's so much there, and I want to ask us to think about a couple things and then do a couple things. So, for us this morning, what's our takeaway? Here's something, first off, to think about. It is really easy to get confused about the difference between religion and doing Bible stuff and doing religious things, right? And Jesus, right? It is easy, and it was easy for them to get confused about doing religious stuff, showing up to church, praying, keeping the religious law. It's easy to get confused and think, oh, God's happy with me because I'm doing religious stuff. When Jesus gets angry about religious people doing religious stuff. So I want us to stop and think. It is easy for us to get confused about whether or not we're following Jesus or just doing religious stuff. Now, it is a good thing to come to church. Don't hear me wrong. It is a good thing to come to church. It is a good thing to praise him. It is a good thing to be involved in the community. But get it, it is really, really, really easy to think that you're following Jesus when actually you just want to be involved in religious stuff. So the question for us to consider is, are you really entranced with and loving and committed to following Jesus, or are you just here to check the box and be a religious person? Because as Jesus wants to show us here, it is easy to be confused about which one you are. So I just want to stop and literally pause and think. Ask yourself, where am I? Loving Jesus means you actually do a lot of almost religious stuff. It means you legitimately pray. You legitimately show up at church. But get this, you are filled. You are committed and filled with love for other people. You're not looking to trip them up on laws and minute rules. You are filled with love, and you understand that God is too. So I'd ask you, consider in your head, where do you stand? Do you love religion, or do you love Jesus? Second thing to consider. It is really easy to be confused about the nature of love, right? Our society and even a lot of times Christians talk about love as though it's just this emotional thing. And understand from this passage, love is not less than an emotion. It is complex. It is so much more. I don't think I understood this until I had kids. And then suddenly you realize you lose the warm and fuzzies for your kids after they poop all over you a couple times, right? When they get the flu and you're like, hold the bucket so that when you puke, it goes in the bucket. And they're like, bucket, 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 blah, blah, and they puke all over you. Suddenly in that moment, you do not feel warm and fuzzy in that way. You feel warm and disgusting, right? And it's horrific. And in that moment, you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do to get here? And yet there's this deep commitment inside those of us who have kids that we don't just chuck them out the window. We're not like, oh, I'm done, I've been chucked on enough. Whereas if somebody else's kids throw up on me, like, you're on your own, little one, sorry, you know? But with my kids and my children, I'm in it hardcore. I'm committed. I love them so much. And therefore, when they do something stupid, when one of them beats up the other one, I am angry, not because I don't love him, but precisely because I do. I think it was Tim Keller. I could be getting this quote wrong, but I'm going to quote it anyway. Tim Keller basically says this. He says, the person who is most angry about a drunk is the drunk's family. The person who's most angry about the abuse of alcohol is not the person who doesn't know him. It's the person who knows them and loves them so much because they see the self-destruction. They see where the course is going, and it angers them. And at the same time, it breaks their heart. You have to understand, this is the heart of Jesus. Don't allow your idea of love to be defined in unbiblical terms. Make sure you understand that love is deep and it's committed and it is emotional, but it is so much more. It is being committed to someone's lifelong good. And it is a willingness to sacrifice, even when all the emotions are gone. It is the willingness to commit to see that that person's life goes in a good direction. Therefore, it will be qualified by anger. So, for those of us who are married, you know what I'm talking about, right? There's times when you are not happy with your spouse. I once had a couple come to me essentially for marriage counseling, and we began talking, and they said, we never fight. And my wife, who's in the room, just busts out laughing and goes, then you don't have a relationship. Because you're not clones. And she began to counsel them and say, hey, I need you guys to listen to me. If you're not fighting, it's not because that's a good thing. It's because you don't have a real relationship. You don't love each other. Not that fighting is wonderful, but there needs to be dialogue. There needs to be engagement with that other person. Their differences has to be brought out. You have to discuss stuff. If there is no friction, there is no relationship, right? Iron sharpens iron. If you care about someone, there will be sparks. Do you actually have a biblical notion of love? And are you practicing it, or do you just feel good? I'm going to crack on Facebook here for just a second. And when something pops up, you press the like button, right? Our society has redefined love, and I have to make sure this person feels good. And understand, Jesus cares about how people feel, right? There's no purpose a couple weeks ago in him reaching forward to touch this leper except to say, I see you, and I love you, and I care about your feelings. But it's so much more. Third thing, it is easy to be confused about why God gets angry. We need to understand this. Because God loves, justice matters. Things must be set right. Evil must be opposed because people matter. And because we love people, we have to oppose injustice. We have to take stands against what is wrong. We have to put ourselves out there and oppose evil because we love. Both evil in ourselves, evil in the room, and evil on the outside. Understand, God hates evil. And he must oppose it, not because he doesn't love, but precisely because he does. So I had a friend a couple years ago that actually grew up with this guy. We played like airplanes, like from the time of middle school, elementary school. We built models together. We played in the creek together. We caught crayfish together. He was a really good friend. We ended up going our separate ways. He went off to college. ended up joining the army, went over to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he came back a different dude. He came back completely broken. He said, I'm walking away from this whole Jesus thing. This whole Jesus thing is jacked up. I don't buy it. All I've heard about is this grace stuff. He said, I have seen terrible, horrible things. And until there's a God who actually brings justice against the evil and the horrific nature of things that I've seen, I will never follow Jesus. And then this crazy thing happened. He started reading his Bible, and he found out that this Jesus guy loves, and because he loves, he brings justice. And so my buddy started reading, and we'd had him over. We played board games with him. We talked with him. We tried to talk through stuff with him, got nowhere, and then he moves away, and we just keep praying with him. One day, I get a text, and it just says, have converted from atheism to Christianity. And I was like, well, dang it. Happened when he was gone, right? He's 1,000 miles away, and that's all I get. And then he came back, and he started talking. He said, dude, what changed? Like, I felt like I told you all about the grace of God all the time, and it didn't do anything. He said, no. What did it for me? The reason I became a Christian, how did I come to follow Jesus? He said, I saw evil firsthand. I saw wickedness. I saw people doing horrific, terrible things, and I cannot live in a world where that ends up being okay. And it was quite hilarious because the problem of evil wasn't the thing that kept him from Christianity and Jesus and religion. Instead, it was the very thing that drove him to it. He said, I came to understand that because Jesus has a furious love for me and for the people of our world, and because he loves, he hates injustice and he hates evil and he must stand opposed to it. It must make him angry and break his heart. He said, I realize that's a God that I can worship. That's a God I want to follow. I want a God who will go make all those things right, who will put a stop to evil and injustice. That's a God that is worthy of my worship. And now Brad's a follower of Jesus. Where do you stand on real issues of justice and mercy right now? At times, Christians have been guilty of talking a big game and not doing very much. That's not true of this church as a whole. As an outsider coming in, I can speak and say, God is at work doing real things here and now to oppose evil and bring justice, and it is good. Question for you, are you loving your neighbor? Are you doing it, or is it just a feeling and a good thought? Okay, couple to-dos and we'll wrap up. First off, are you in community? And what I mean by community is who in your life knows you well enough and loves you well enough to say you are off course? Who knows you well enough to say, hey, you are headed in a bad direction and it's going to end badly for you if you don't turn? Because get it, that's what Jesus is doing here. Jesus loves these guys so much. Even though they are opposed to him, he is confronting them. This is an intervention of sorts. He is telling them, I love you too much to see you continue down this course. And he is angry and he's frustrated and he's hurt because their hearts are so hard, they can't hear it. They are missing out on what God is doing and they are perpetuating evil instead, and it breaks his heart. Friends, whose heart is breaking over you? Because if you're like, hey, I don't really need that, you don't know yourself very well. The Bible says the heart is desperately wicked. It doesn't mean we're doing bad stuff all the time. It means it's actually the words there are, it's hard to know. The heart is hard to know, and it's desperately wicked. You need other people. You need Jesus in your life speaking through other people to say, hey, bro, you need a little course correction. Or maybe you need a big course correction. Are you in real community with real people who know you well enough to speak in your life and say, this will end badly for you, and because you're going down this direction, I'm angry about it, and I'm grieved over it. If you are not in community, your life will be stunted, right? It's the plant that doesn't get enough sunlight, that never gets fertilized, never gets water. It eventually grows crooked and it dies. Are you in community? There's lots of opportunities. If your answer to that is no, you cannot stay there. And maybe the next step for you is to say, how do I do that? GVF has a lot of people that would love to talk to you about that. I'm not on GVF staff, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it because community is essential for your life. Who knows you and loves you well enough to confront you and help you get on the right path? Second, are you willing, when confronted, when loved, in anger and in heartbreak, to actually change course? Because what makes Jesus so angry isn't actually what they're doing. It says specifically, it's their hard hearts. Are you willing to turn and change when Jesus speaks into your life? Because it's possible to be incredibly religious, show up at church, do all the right stuff, outward appear great, and yet, according to Jesus here, to have a really hard heart that doesn't want to follow, but wants to keep checking all the boxes. So friends, we have to dwell on this. Not only who will speak to us, but are you willing to go to someone and say, hey, I deep down am broken. This is the heart of what it means to be a Christian. Let's come and say humbly, I'm a broken person in need of redemption, and I need the voice of Jesus spoken through other people, through his word, to lead to correction in my life. I need to be set on the right course. For me to be fully human and fully engaged in everything God is doing as the image of God, I need to be willing to have a soft heart and be turnable, right? Because having a hard heart means I'm sticking to my course no matter what. I'm not open to input. Are you willing to change? And third, and this is kind of the last thing, and this is kind of a capstone thing, music here this morning was wonderful. I was able to stand at the back and just sing, and it was really good. And it's part of worship, but I want to invite you and ask you, do you actually come to worship? What I mean is not, do you enjoy the music or do you enjoy hearing some guy talk for 44 minutes? Because if you do, that's a good thing. But get it, that's not worship. It's part of it. But really worshiping a sovereign Lord and a king and a creator who claims to speak for God himself, who, as we see in the coming chapters, actually claims not just to speak for God, but ... We'll save that one for next week, right? For you to come to worship is to put yourself under the authority and rule and deep, passionate, broken-hearted love and anger of a God who loves you so much that he would leave heaven itself. He would enter into our world. He would suffer. He would willingly, knowingly pursue his enemies in love. A God who says, I am not willing to leave you where you're at, headed on the path of destruction. I will intervene. I will intervene by taking your sins on myself. I myself will go to a cross having done nothing wrong, completely innocent, because I want you to know I die, I suffer for your sins. And then that same person will rise from the grave, bringing full new creation life into this world here and now. And he continues right now to bring new life and new creation in and through his people here. If you are a follower of Jesus, you are pleaded with by him, come to worship. Do not confuse the idea that singing and being here equals worship. No, it's a reflection of our worship. It's a reflection of the way we say, Jesus, you are everything to me. I can trust you with my whole life because you know me and you love me and you're willing to oppose me when I'm wrong and you're willing to affirm my value before God and before other people all the time. Are you really coming to worship? It's easy for me, and this is just true confession. If you haven't noticed, I'm kind of an emotional dude, right? So I cry pretty easy. So I actually watched the new Avengers movie, and despite what my brother-in-law said, I did not cry, and I'm proud of it, right? That's a big step for me, right? Because something may have happened during Titanic that we shall not talk about, okay? I may have cried at Star Wars The Force Awakens when the Millennium Falcon shows up, right? Because that's my childhood. My childhood is built around the Bible and Star Wars, right? Not equal, but very much influential. So no joke. I'm there with my wife, and suddenly the Millennium Falcon bursts on screen, and Rey and Finn run to it and hop in, and suddenly I tear up, right? It's so ridiculous. I can be driven by emotions. And that's not bad. It's not bad to have emotions. Jesus has intense emotions, right? But there's so much more to worship than emotions. And Jesus is inviting us, come, join with me, follow me, and know that if you follow me, get this, it will be emotional. Don't pursue it for the emotions, but know that there will be incredible highs and incredible lows. He is calling us to follow him, to worship him by laying down our lives and dying. That's crazy. Death is never fun. No one looks at death and thinks, woohoo! Instead, he says, take up your cross and follow me. To follow Jesus, to actually worship him, is to lay down your life and say, Jesus, I trust you to make good on this. And at the same time, it's also to say, wow, look at what happens in people's lives when I give my life away for them. And you will see amazing things. You will experience emotional highs and lows, but get it. Are you really worshiping? Are you engaging with the Lord of creation? Or are you missing out on what's really there? Don't miss it. Engage Jesus. And if you want someone to talk to, come and talk to me. Come and find anybody that's on GVF staff. Come and find almost anybody and just start the conversation. I'm inviting you. Come worship. We're going to sing a song. Let this song be an opportunity for you to praise the one who came for us. Let me pray. Lord God, this is very emotional for me. Like I cried over a dog. I cried over the spaceship. This is crazy. And yet, nothing compares with the knowledge that the God of creation loves me so much, pursues me so hard that he willingly gave himself up for my sins. You, God, willingly offer forgiveness of sins, and you do so because you die on the cross for my sins as proof that my sins are forgiven. And at the same time, you love me too much to leave me where I'm at. And so you deal with me when my anger is not righteous, and you deal with me when I'm passive, when I don't actually love enough to care. You oppose my apathy, and you call me to true worship and to true love. And so, Father, I want to say thank you. We love you. We are so thankful that you did not leave us to go our own ways, but you intervened. God, we plead with you, come, lead us to worship now. Allow our hearts to be filled with knowledge of who you are for us. In Jesus' name.